The woman paused on the threshold, a silhouette against the blinding New Mexico sun, holding a worn valise as if it were the only tether to a world she'd left behind. At 20, Evelyn Thorne possessed an unsettling, brittle elegance. A cascade of raven hair, eyes the color of high desert turquoise, and skin untouched by the brutal sun that reigned over the territory. But it was the cold finality of her arrival that unsettled Lucas McCain most. Not a single sound had passed her lips since the lawyer, a pale, sweating man from Santa Fe, collected his payment and rode off without a backward glance. Lucas McCain, 35, a man weathered like old stone, wiped his hands on his dusty denim trousers, his gaze sweeping the sparse comfort of his solitary homestead near the Pecos River. He was a man of routines, comfortable with the vast, quiet expanse of the mesa, where his only company was the occasional Navajo rider or the sigh of the wind through the sagebrush. He'd requested a woman through a matrimonial agency, a robust, practical woman, someone who understood the gritty survival demanded by this unforgiving land. Not this delicate stranger who looked as likely to break as to manage his small cattle ranch, the Double Bar. The contract, a legal document signed by a distant relative to settle a crippling debt, felt suddenly like a shameful burden in his shirt pocket. "You thirsty?" Lucas asked, his voice a low rumble. Evelyn's eyes flickered toward him, then immediately fixated on the cool, dark hearth where yesterday's ashes lay undisturbed. She gave a slight shake of her head. Her silk traveling gown, though simple, was wholly unsuited for the heat, and hung loosely on her frame, a stark visual testament to the desperation that had driven her here. Lucas felt a deep, unfamiliar disquiet. He'd envisioned a partnership, a way to share the crushing solitude. Instead, a desolate silence stretched between them, heavy as a summer storm. "The back room is yours," Lucas stated, gesturing with his chin. "The bolt works well from the inside." For the first time, a flicker, was it relief or perhaps calculated consideration, crossed her beautiful features. She nodded, clutching the valise tighter. Outside, the harsh sunlight began to yield to the evening chill, and a dust storm, the harbinger of a long, dry season, began to swirl over the painted mesa. They were now bound together, two unwilling participants in a gamble neither fully understood. 4 days unfolded in a strange, meticulous dance. Lucas rose at the first light, dealt with the minimal herd, and returned to find Evelyn a silent, efficient presence in his small adobe kitchen. She prepared simple, flavorful food, beans, stews, and tortillas that tasted of the South, and kept the small dwelling spotless. Yet she remained an enigma, never speaking, never meeting his eyes for more than a second. On the 5th morning, Lucas found her standing by the window, hands pressed against the glass, gazing at the first faint signs of a coming sandstorm. She wore a thin cotton shift, wholly inadequate for the pre-dawn chill. "You'll freeze to death out here," he muttered, pulling a heavy wool serape from a chair and draping it over her shoulders. She recoiled, a sudden sharp movement, then just as quickly let the heavy fabric settle. "Evelyn," he waited until she raised her gaze. "This situation, it's not right." Her eyes widened, apprehension clouding their blue depths. Did she believe he meant to void the contract, return her to the unforgiving family who had bartered her away? "I understand the agreement," Lucas said, his tone softening. "But you are clearly not prepared for this life, and I am not a monster." He paused, searching for the right words. "What I mean is that paper binds us legally, but it doesn't bind your will. Nothing happens here that you don't consent to. Nothing." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the serape. When she finally spoke, her voice was a breathy, high sound, rough from disuse. "The lawyer," he said, "you would demand your due, said it was my obligation now." The word struck Lucas with the weight of cold iron. He thought of the man who sold her, a distant land-rich cousin obsessed with paying off mining debts, and felt a powerful surge of protective anger. A man was desperate, and desperately wrong. Lucas stated firmly, keeping his distance. "You are safe here. That's the only truth that matters." A fragile wall seemed to crumble in her expression. She pulled the serape closer and nodded, tears welling up but not spilling. As relief washed over Lucas, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, too many and too fast, cutting sharply through the early morning stillness. Through the window he counted 5 mounted men. The lead rider dismounted, his boots hitting the packed earth, the sun glinting off a familiar silver star. Territorial Marshal Vance. Behind him were 4 others, including a man Lucas recognized as Josiah Thorne, Evelyn's ruthless cousin, flanked by 3 known desperados from the Copper Creek territory, men with reputations as quick and brutal as rattlesnakes. They hadn't come for justice. They'd come for her. The marshal's knock was a heavy official punctuation mark on the morning. Lucas moved slowly, his hand brushing the sturdy Winchester rifle mounted above the fireplace. Evelyn melted against the wall, the sirapa shroud of fear. "Open up, McCain." "Official business." Lucas lifted the heavy latch, stepping onto the porch with a practiced stillness. "Marshal," Lucas greeted him. "A bit early for a social call." "This ain't social." Vance's voice was clipped. "I've got a complaint filed this morning. Says you're holding a legal ward against her guardian's wishes." "Is that so?" Lucas's tone was deliberately unconcerned. "You might want to check the territorial registry. The lady is my legal wife, signed, sealed, and paid for." Josiah Thorne spat a stream of brown liquid onto the dirt. "That contract is worthless." The girl was distraught, coerced. "We have witnesses that will testify you forced her into that sham marriage." Lucas felt a knot of dread twist in his gut. They had orchestrated this. They'd wait until the contract was fulfilled, and then invent a charge to seize her, knowing he'd be tied up in the corrupt territorial courts. They'd take Evelyn, nullify the marriage, and then Lucas knew sell her to the highest bidder in one of the far-off lawless towns beyond the Gila River. "Witnesses," Lucas echoed, the word dripping with contempt. "Does that include the same relative who signed the paper and took the money?" "The money was stolen," Thorne shouted, his voice rising in manufactured outrage. "Stolen from my father's estate. Makes the whole transaction void from the start." The lie hung heavy in the heated air. Lucas saw the perfect, inescapable trap. Behind him a floorboard creaked. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, the sirapa clutched tight, her face pale but resolute. "Cousin Josiah," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly strong. "I wondered when you'd arrive." Marshal Vance turned, studying the woman with a sharp, assessing gaze. "Miss Thorne, you need to step away from Mr. McCain. We have serious allegations regarding your welfare here." Evelyn's turquoise eyes met Lucas's, holding them in a look that felt like a silent conversation, a moment where a life-altering choice was being forged. The wind picked up, swirling sand between the cabin and the mounted men, and Lucas knew they were standing on a precipice, with violence one heartbeat away. "I am not leaving," Evelyn declared, her words slicing through the morning air with a startling force. She stepped fully onto the porch, her bare feet touching the sun-warmed dirt, positioning herself deliberately beside Lucas. Marshal Vance frowned. "Miss, you don't understand the charges. These men are here to ensure your protection." "Protection?" Evelyn's laughter was a brittle, sharp sound. "Marshal, did Cousin Josiah tell you what he was protecting me from when the contract was made?" Josiah's face darkened with rage. "The girl has been lied to. Don't listen to her wicked tongue." But Evelyn continued, her voice gaining momentum. "He told my family I was too valuable to waste on a decent man like Mr. McCain. He said he knew brokers in Tucson who would pay 10 times as much for a woman like me. Brokers who didn't believe in marriage contracts." The words were like stones hitting glass. Lucas saw the marshal's expression harden. The lawman's instincts recognized the ring of truth. Even the hired gun shifted uncomfortably. "That's a very serious accusation, miss," Vance said slowly. Evelyn reached into the pocket of her shift, her hand emerging with a folded, brittle sheet of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it to the marshal. "Cousin Josiah wrote a letter to my relative detailing his plans. He couldn't read, so he asked me to keep it." Lucas watched Vance unfold the letter, saw the marshal's face drain of color as he scanned the contents. Whatever was written there painted Josiah Thorne in the blackest imaginable colors. "This letter," Vance's voice was heavy with authority. "This describes arrangements that would be a federal offense in this territory. Trafficking in persons." Josiah Thorne spurred his horse forward, desperation twisting his features. "She forged that. A girl's lie to save her miserable hide. It's in your own hand, Thorne." Vance's tone had turned frigid. "With details about specific houses in Tucson that we've been trying to link to you for a year." The trap had indeed closed, but around the wrong man. Evelyn had been holding the evidence of her cousin's true intentions all along, Proof that the arrangement with Lucas, however flawed, had been her desperate act of salvation. Lucas felt a profound mix of awe and respect bloom in his chest. Her silence had not been fear, it had been strategy. Her quiet patience, a weapon. Evelyn's fingers found Lucas's arm, a fleeting touch of deep acknowledgement. Lucas has been nothing but honorable with me, Marshal. Kinder than any man in my own family. The cold air seemed to crackle with finality. Vance folded the letter, his decision set. Josiah Thorne, Marshal Vance announced. You are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted trafficking. Boys, he barked at the hired guns. I suggest you ride out, now. The desperados needed no further warning. They spun their horses and galloped toward the canyon, leaving Josiah to face the law. This is not finished, Evelyn, Thorne snarled as the marshal secured iron cuffs on his wrists. Your family will curse you for this betrayal. My family is gone, cousin. Evelyn's voice held a quiet, devastating finality. They died the night after I left with Lucas's money. A fire. There is no one left to curse me. The words struck Lucas like a revelation. She was utterly alone, with nowhere and no one to return to. As the marshal's party disappeared into the distant juniper, a strange, expectant silence descended upon the homestead. Lucas turned to face her. Why didn't you tell me, Evelyn? About the letter? About your family? She met his gaze, and for the first time, Lucas saw not the terrified girl from the doorway, but a woman hardened by survival. Because I needed to know what kind of man you were, she said simply. Whether you'd use the contract like the others wanted, or if you were the man who would tear it up and protect me. A faint, beautiful smile touched her lips, the first he had ever seen. And now? Lucas asked. Now, she said, stepping toward the kitchen. Now I know. They went inside, and Evelyn began to make strong chili coffee with calm, deliberate movements. The small adobe house felt different, suddenly charged with a palpable potential. They were still strangers in many ways, but they had survived the darkness together. They had time now, and the freedom to choose their future, and the quiet beginning of a bond forged not by law, but by courage. Years later, when Evelyn was 30, and their 2 children chased each other through the kitchen, she would tell Lucas that she had not fallen in love with the man who had bought her, but with the man who had the integrity to set her free. Outside their window, the stark beauty of the New Mexico mesa stretched out, clean, unforgiving, and full of infinite possibility. And in the rich, deep silence of the afternoon, Lucas would sometimes hear her humming a tune she'd never dared sing before, the sound of a woman who had finally found her voice and her home.